Tensions over Crimea reignite as Moscow accuses Kiev of sending terrorists to carry out attacks on the Black Sea Peninsula. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko dismissed the allegations as fantasy and called the country's military to high alert.
I sent the order to deploy all units of the armed forces, National Guard, Security Service, especially the border guard on the area of the Crimea and on the front line in the east.
Moscow and Kiev have been locked in a bitter dispute over Crimea ever since the Kremlin seized the peninsula back in 2014, in the wake of former President Viktor Yanukovych's ouster. To support its claims, Russia's main domestic security agency, the FSB, released footage on Thursday which shows munitions and explosive devices that were to be used in a terrorist plot that was allegedly foiled by the agency. Kiev has shot back, blaming Moscow for the escalation in tensions.
Ukraine has not carried out any provocations in the region. No servicemen from the intelligence unit of the Ukrainian army have been detained. All these acts, the Kremlin statements discrediting Ukraine, hurt the Minsk agreements and escalate the conflict in the east, which is caused by Russian aggression.
The renewed tensions come as Kiev prepares to celebrate the 25th anniversary of its independence from Russia later this month, and the Kremlin gets ready to hold parliamentary elections on September 18th.
More breaking news for you. Unfortunately, we have to report that the Russian army, 40,000 strong, are now mobilizing near the Ukrainian border. NATO is now lashing out against Vladimir Putin, telling him that he needs to back down. There is reports of heavy fighting between Ukrainian military and Russian separatists. They say it has erupted along the border between the Ukraine and Russia near Donetsk. They state that the reports now of heavy shelling and machine gun fire. They also report here that in the occupied region to the west on the Crimean Peninsula, there are reports that Russia has shut down the internet. Russia has shut down the internet for security reasons after reports of the shootout on the border. Now, the article states here that Ukraine has placed its troops onto the highest level now of combat readiness as they are preparing for a threat of a full Russian invasion. Now, there was an emergency meeting, they state here, of the United Nations Security Council. Ukrainian ambassador stated that Russia has 40,000 troops in Crimea with, quote, bad intentions. They also state that a spokesman for the Ukrainian security forces has said that Russian troops along the border are currently digging trenches and moving into battle formation.
Breaking news from the border. New details emerging right now on a foiled suicide bomb plot in Canada, where police killed the suspect. Dramatic operation. ABC's chief global affairs anchor Martha Raddatz has all the latest. Good morning, Martha.
Good morning, George. Canadian authorities believed the planned suicide attack on a major city in Canada was imminent. SWAT teams and the bomb squad swarmed a residence about an hour north of the U.S. border where 23-year-old Aaron Driver was hiding out, eventually killing him in a hail of bullets. Canadian television says Driver planned to use a homemade bomb to carry out the suicide mission in a public area with the goal, George, of creating mass casualties.
And Martha, he'd been on their radar.
He was known as an ISIS sympathizer who posted on social media, although there is no evidence yet that he was directed by the terror group, but he had been previously arrested. Police say he once published instructions for aspiring jihadists to reach Syria and referred to non-Muslims as enemies. George?
Police searched for clues at one of the bomb sites where a street vendor was reportedly killed. 2 bombs went off within half an hour of each other, 50 meters apart. One was thought to have been hidden in this plant pot. The bombings happened as the streets were bustling with late-night diners. Hours later, another twin blast hit Hua Hin, a popular weekend getaway for locals and foreigners, just a 2-hour drive from the capital Bangkok. As well as the 4 blasts in Hua Hin, There are also 2 on the island of Phuket and the island getaway town of Suratani in the country's south. One exploded in front of the marine police offices, killing at least 1 person. No one has so far claimed responsibility for the attacks. Simultaneous bombings are a regular occurrence in Thailand's southern provinces, where the government has been fighting an Islamic insurgency for decades. Attacks in other tourist areas, however, are rare. Hua Hin, Thailand's oldest seaside resort, is also home to Klai Kangwon Palace, the preferred residence of King Bhumibol Adulyadej. The bombings came just as Thailand prepared to celebrate the Queen's birthday, a national holiday, on Friday.
Rio Olympics organizers admitted Thursday that preparations could have been better for the 2016 Olympics. Brazil is currently in its worst recession since the 1930s, and an ongoing political crisis has divided South America's most populous nation. 5 days into the Olympic Games, there have been issues with security and transportation, and many stands have been empty. Games spokesman Maria Andrada said, "It is clear that everything we do in life, when we look back, we believe we could do better." In the latest incident, a military police car near the stadium was shot at, leaving 3 members of the patrol wounded, with 1 in critical condition.
Turkey has offered to carry out joint operations with Russia in the fight against Islamic State in Syria. That comes just days after Presidents Putin and Erdogan met in St. Petersburg for crucial talks to mend ties between the 2 nations.
We will discuss all the details. We have always called on Russia to carry out anti-Daesh operations with us. We have to fight against Daesh altogether. We will actively participate in operations with our planes.
Major developments in the race for president tonight. Donald Trump at his new attack against President Obama, saying that President Obama is the founder of ISIS. Trump in Florida today, standing by his word, saying Hillary Clinton is the co-founder. And you will hear what he said when asked by a conservative radio host if that's what he really meant.
Tonight in Florida, I call President Obama and Hillary Clinton the founders of ISIS. They're the founders. Donald Trump is hammering away at that new line of attack.
ISIS is honoring President Obama. He is the founder of ISIS. He's the founder of ISIS. I would say the co-founder would be crooked Hillary Clinton.
Conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt pressed him on that.
I know what you meant. You meant that he created the vacuum, he lost the peace.
No, I meant he's the founder of ISIS.
But he's not sympathetic to them. He hates them. He's trying to kill them.
He was the founder.
Finally, there's something bringing Democratic and Republican lawmakers together: the manipulation of intelligence reports about ISIS. 2 separate congressional investigations reached basically the same conclusion. Senior officials at U.S. Central Command presented a more positive depiction of the fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria than the facts really warranted. Representative Mike Pompeo, a leader of the Republicans' investigation, said this information manipulation, quote, may well have resulted in putting American troops at risk as policymakers relied on this intelligence when formulating policy and allocating resources for the fight. The blame was placed all the way at the very top of CENTCOM's pecking order, just without naming names. The other investigation, led by House Democrats, found CENTCOM, quote, created an overly insular process for producing intelligence assessments and insufficiently accommodated dissenting views. This basically calls into question just how much of a success the US-led bombing campaign against ISIS has been, at least when it comes to the CENTCOM version of events. But the reports also didn't find any evidence the White House or anyone in the administration ordered that any of the reports be changed. The Republican-led Joint Task Force says this is just a preliminary report and the investigation is still going on. That's in addition to another investigation by the Department of Defense.
A group of doctors in Syria is pleading to President Obama for help. Almost 30 doctors in a rebel-held district of Aleppo signed an open letter received by the White House. They warn that if attacks on medical facilities continue at their present rate, they could all be destroyed in a month. CBS News received these photos from a group of American doctors who say they escaped recent bombing in Aleppo. Deborah Patta is following events in Aleppo from Syria's capital, Damascus. Deborah, good morning.
Good morning. The warnings are dire. Over 2 million people in Aleppo are in danger of running out of food, fuel, medical supplies and water in a city that has been under siege for weeks now amidst incessant fighting. Russia announced a unilateral daily 3-hour ceasefire starting today to allow aid into the city. But it failed before it even began, as neither the rebel coalition nor the Syrian government appear to have endorsed the truce. The heavy fighting never stopped. Overnight, there have also been reports of another alleged chlorine gas attack in rebel-held Aleppo. One witness described a chemical explosion, then the smell of gas. The children, he said, all of us were choking. Even if all parties agree to a ceasefire, the United Nations wants more time, insisting it needs 48 hours to bring in desperately needed resources to the war-weary people of Aleppo.
The U.S. military's highest court has rejected the religious freedom defense of a Christian Marine who was punished for posting Bible verses. The court upheld the court-martial and dishonorable discharge of Marine Lance Corporal Monifa Sterling. She refused to remove a Bible verse she posted at her desk in 2013. Her attorneys argued her punishment was a violation of her religious freedom and a landmark case that could set a military precedent for decades.
The bottom line is that service members shouldn't be punished for expressing their faith. We ask service members to do some of the hardest things in the world, and we shouldn't ask them to leave their faith behind, and we shouldn't punish them for expressing their faith in the workplace.
The scripture posted on Sterling's computer and desk was from Isaiah chapter 54, which reads, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper."
The 2-month anniversary of the Pulse terror attack, hundreds of protesters gathered to oppose a religious conference supported by a group the Southern Poverty Law Center calls extremist and anti-LGBTQ. The American Renewal Project is a gathering of hundreds of evangelical pastors, and this year they're hearing from Republicans Donald Trump and Senator Marco Rubio in person. Investigative reporter Christopher Heath is at the event, and Chris, Trump just finished his remarks. What did he say?
Well, then about the last hour or so, Donald Trump wrapped up his remarks. He addressed the crowd. This is about 700 evangelical leaders. These are people who overwhelmingly voted for him in the primary. These are voters he'll need going into the general election. He talked about the importance of faith in the public sector. His remarks today just wrapped up. Marco Rubio will speak tomorrow, both speaking in front of a group that many have labeled discriminatory. On the outside, a passionate plea for peace and understanding.
Homophobia has to be eradicated out of the church.
The protesters, comprised of religious leaders, activists, and family members of Pulse victims, came here to oppose the American Renewal Project, a religious group with ties to anti-LGBTQ views, a religious group meeting in Orlando on the 2-month anniversary of the Pulse attack.
It means putting a stop to what they're doing in there. It means trying to show a voice for what they're doing.
Celia Ruiz's brother was killed in the attack.
It's disrespectful what they're doing, and especially to do it today.
For its part, the group says it's only focused on increasing religious involvement in politics. In a statement to Eyewitness News, group leader David Lane said, quote, "This isn't about supporting or opposing any particular person or candidate. It's about bringing people of faith together to have a positive impact in our communities and our country."
Without religious liberty, you don't have liberty.
Addressing the group today, first Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, whose remarks were broadcast live. Tomorrow, Florida Senator Marco Rubio will take the stage with his comments closed to the media. And within the last couple of minutes, we did get a statement from the Rubio campaign. It says, in part, "Because I believe that a strong America is not possible without strong families and strong values. For years now, I have participated in events hosted by faith leaders to speak about the cultural and social issues before America." Of course, Marco Rubio will address this group tomorrow. The protesters out here today, some of them said they will return tomorrow to protest his speech as well. Again, saying the group inside, these 700 pastors, what they represent is a strong view against LGBTQ rights, but the group inside, of course, saying all they're trying to do is increase involvement between the religious community and the political community.
The World Wrestling Entertainment Company, better known as the WWE, takes steps towards becoming more inclusive. Stephanie McMahon, the WWE's chief brand officer, made the announcement on August 9th while speaking at a Beyond Sport United conference in New York. The wrestling organization will be integrating LGBT characters into their programming in the near future. While speaking to NBC Out, McMahon said being gay has always been accepted in the WWE, but now, quote, it's about getting that message out there. GLAAD, a LGBT media advocacy organization, was brought into the WWE's writing room to teach writers about sensitivities when telling stories about LGBT people. During her interview, McMahon brought up the wrestling legend Pat Patterson, the first ever WWE Intercontinental Champion. Patterson came out publicly on a reality TV program on the WWE Network in 2014 and recently released a book titled Accepted that chronicles his life as a gay wrestler.
Polygamy must become a civil right in Italy similar to same-sex civil unions, which the country allowed earlier this year, a prominent Muslim representative has said. There's no reason for Italy not to accept polygamous marriages of consenting persons, Hamza Picardo, founder of the Union of Islamic Communities and Organizations, UCOI, wrote in a controversial Facebook post last week. When it comes to civil rights here, then polygamy is a civil right. Muslims don't agree with homosexual partnership, and still they have to accept a system that allows it, he stressed.
If you can't beat them, join them. Macy's is boosting investment in its online operations and closing about 100 stores. Most of the store closings will come in 2017. The company has been under pressure from activist investor Starboard Value to monetize its huge real estate portfolio. Retail industry analyst David Schick of Consumer Edge Research.
Stores, footage that retailers either lease or own, can almost be a liability today, right? Because the amount of time we spend shopping and communicating online shrinks the amount of time we actually spend in stores.
Shares of the company soared on the news, but O-Shares ETF's Kevin O'Leary says Macy's stock is not a bargain.
Macy's is not a stock I would buy right now. I don't like buying reinventing business models. There's too much risk in it for me.
Just like other department stores, Macy's has been struggling with stiff competition from online and off-price retailers. It's also facing shifting spending patterns, with shoppers shelling out on big-ticket items like electronics and cars rather than clothes.
The McKinsey Global Institute recently released a report which showed that 81% of Americans are worse off now than they were 10 years ago. That sounds like a startling figure, and yet I bet a lot of Americans are not startled at all, because they very much feel the truth behind that finding. The researchers had a team of about 40 people working on this report entitled Poorer Than Their Parents: Flat or Falling Incomes in Advanced Economies. It studied the years between 2005 and 2014 and found that incomes in advanced economies, including the U.S., were either flat or fell for about 65 to 70% of people across the board, or for more than 540 million people around the world. And the U.S. saw the even sadder figure of 81% of its households seeing flat or falling income. Richard Dobbs is a senior partner at McKinsey, and he told Bloomberg News that what people were most upset about is not that others got rich. It's not about people wanting to be one-percenters. It's just about people seeing that they are earning less money now than they were 10 years ago, while their rents get jacked up and the price of everything has gone up. But the worst part is that, Dobbs says, not only are we starting to be poorer than our parents, we are also on track to be richer than our children. Which means if we carry on our current trajectory, 80% of our children will be much worse off than their grandparents. The exact opposite of what's supposed to be the American dream. Dobbs has an explanation of why this is happening. He says our growth has slowed down, and then also more of the growth is going to fewer of the people. The top 1% are hoovering up all the growth, squeezing 80% of us into having less money than we did a decade ago.
Firefighters battling huge blazes in France, Spain, and Portugal, hot, dry summer weather and treacherous winds have combined to make their efforts very difficult. Thousands of emergency response workers have been deployed to combat wildfires raging across southern Europe. The fires are destroying homes and prompting the evacuation of thousands. Fanned by gusty winds over 30 kilometers per hour, they are expected to continue to pose a threat. CNN weather forecasters predict hotter than average temperatures to continue across the region and little to no chance of rain. high as 200 meteors per hour expected to streak across the night sky, the Perseid meteor shower is set to reach its peak early Friday morning. The outburst of meteors forecast is double the usual rate. The annual meteor shower is one no sky gazer will want to miss. From International Falls, Minnesota to El Paso, Texas, the clearest view will be in the western states. Viewing will be difficult along the California coast because of fog, but clearer skies are expected inland. According to NASA, the best time is sometime after midnight, but before dawn on Friday. The space agency also recommends going outside for 45 minutes first to allow your eyes to adjust to the dark.